I never imagined that my life would take such a sharp turn that evening. At 40, I thought I had seen it all. Married for 15 years to Tom, a loving husband and father to our 2 children, and living a stable life in a beautiful home in the suburbs of Boston. Our lives had settled into a comfortable routine, and while everything seemed perfect on the outside, I often felt like something was missing, a spark that had faded over time. But I never expected that spark to reignite in the most unexpected way. It all started when Tom's younger brother, Daniel, came to stay with us for a few weeks. Daniel had always been the charming one, 5 years younger than Tom, with a carefree attitude that made him the life of every family gathering. He was handsome, with dark wavy hair and a smile that could light up a room. While Tom was more reserved and focused on his career, Daniel was adventurous and spontaneous, always up for a good time. When Daniel called Tom and asked if he could stay with us while his apartment was being renovated, I didn't think twice about it. After all, he was family, and we had plenty of space. Tom was thrilled to have his brother around, and I was happy to help out. But I didn't anticipate the changes that his presence would bring to our lives. Daniel arrived on a Friday evening, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and his trademark grin. "Hey, sis," he greeted me with a warm hug as he stepped into our home. "Thanks for letting me crash here for a while." "Of course, Daniel," I replied, smiling back. "You're always welcome here." Tom joined us in the living room, and the brothers immediately fell into their usual banter, catching up on old times and laughing about childhood memories. I watched them from the kitchen, feeling a sense of nostalgia. It had been years since we'd all spent this much time together, and I couldn't help but feel a bit of that old excitement creeping back into my life. The first few days passed without incident. Daniel quickly settled into our home, and his easygoing nature made him a joy to have around. He helped with the kids, cooked dinner a few times, and even managed to convince Tom and me to take a break from our hectic schedules to enjoy a family game night. It was like having a breath of fresh air in the house, and I found myself looking forward to his company more and more. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice a shift in the dynamic between us. It started with small things. Daniel would catch my eye across the room and flash me a playful wink, or he'd find an excuse to touch my arm when we were talking. At first, I brushed it off as harmless flirting. After all, that was just Daniel's personality. But as time went on, I started to feel a tension between us that I couldn't ignore. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed and Tom was working late, Daniel and I found ourselves alone in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine. We had been talking about everything and nothing. Work, life, the kids. When Daniel suddenly turned to me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and intense. "Can I ask you something?" I felt a flutter of nerves in my stomach, but I nodded. "Of course, Daniel. What's on your mind?" He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. "Do you ever feel like something's missing? Like you're just going through the motions, but you're not really living?" The question caught me off guard, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. How did he know? How could he have seen through the facade I had been putting up for so long? I looked down at my glass, swirling the wine as I tried to gather my thoughts. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I do feel that way. But I don't know what to do about it." Daniel reached out and gently took my hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You deserve to feel alive." I looked up at him, my heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something that made it impossible to look away. I knew I should pull my hand back, that I should keep things between us strictly platonic, but I couldn't bring myself to move. "Daniel," I began, my voice trembling, "we shouldn't." "Why not?" he interrupted, his grip on my hand tightening. "Why can't we be honest with each other? Why can't we admit that there's something between us?" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I could feel the tension building between us, the pull that had been growing stronger with each passing day. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement, a thrill that I hadn't felt in a long time. "We can't do this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Tom is your brother. This is wrong." "I know it's complicated," Daniel replied, his voice earnest. but I can't help how I feel. And I don't think you can either. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the emotions that were threatening to overwhelm me. But the truth was, he was right. I couldn't deny the attraction I felt for him, the connection that had been growing between us. It was wrong, and I knew it, but it was also undeniable. Before I could say anything more, Daniel leaned in and kissed me. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he was giving me a chance to pull away. But when I didn't, it deepened, his hand moving to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. My mind screamed at me to stop, to push him away, but my body refused to listen. I kissed him back, my hands finding their way to his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. It was wrong, I knew it was, but in that moment, all I could think about was how good it felt to be wanted, to be desired. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our hearts pounding in unison. I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, desire, confusion. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We can't do this. This is wrong." "I know," he replied, his hand still resting on my neck, his thumb gently stroking my skin. "But I don't regret it. Do you?" I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, but all I saw was sincerity. He meant every word, and that terrified me. Because the truth was, I didn't regret it either. But that didn't make it right. "We have to stop," I said, my voice firmer this time. "We can't keep doing this. It's not fair to Tom." Daniel nodded, his expression pained. "I know. But that doesn't change how I feel about you." "I care about you too, Daniel," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "But we can't act on these feelings. It's too dangerous." He sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "You're right. I don't want to cause any trouble between you and Tom. I'll keep my distance." I felt a pang of sadness at his words, but I knew it was for the best. We couldn't let this go any further. The risk was too great, and the consequences could be devastating. The days that followed were a mix of tension and restraint. Daniel kept his promise, avoiding being alone with me, and I tried to focus on my marriage, on repairing the distance that had grown between Tom and me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about that kiss, about the way Daniel had made me feel. Then, one evening when Tom was out of town for work and the kids were staying with their grandparents, Daniel and I found ourselves alone in the house once again. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen when I heard a soft knock on the doorframe. I turned to see Daniel standing there, his expression serious. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and intense. "We need to talk." I felt my heart skip a beat, a mix of fear and anticipation swirling in my chest. "What is it, Daniel?" "I can't keep pretending that everything is okay," he said, stepping closer. "I can't keep denying how I feel about you." "Daniel, please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We agreed." "I know what we agreed," he interrupted, his eyes locking onto mine. "But I can't help it, Sarah. I'm falling for you. And I think you're falling for me too." His words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. He was right, of course. I had been trying to deny it, to push it away, but the truth was, I had developed feelings for him. And the more time we spent together, the stronger those feelings became. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. "I love Tom, but I can't stop thinking about you." "I don't want to come between you and my brother," Daniel said softly, his hand reaching out to gently wipe away a tear that had escaped down my cheek. "But I can't walk away from this either. Not without knowing if there's something real between us." The air between us was thick with tension, and I knew I was standing at a crossroads. I could either walk away from Daniel and try to salvage my marriage, or I could give in to the feelings that had been building between us, and risk everything in the process. Before I could make a decision, Daniel closed the distance between us and kissed me again, this time with more urgency, more passion. My resolve crumbled, and I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair as I pulled him closer. The next few hours were a blur of emotions. Desire, guilt, fear. We gave in to the attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface, losing ourselves in the moment. It was exhilarating, but it was also wrong, and I knew that the consequences would be dire. When it was over, we lay together on the couch, the reality of what we had done slowly sinking in. I felt a deep sense of guilt, of regret, but I also felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if I had found something that had been missing from my life for so long. But that sense of fulfillment was short-lived, as the weight of our actions began to settle over me like a dark cloud. How could I face Tom now, knowing what I had done? How could I live with myself, knowing that I had betrayed the man I loved? As if sensing my turmoil, Daniel reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and comforting. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "But we've made a mess of things, Daniel. I don't know how to fix this." "We'll figure it out," he said softly, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what." But his words offered little comfort. The reality of our situation was too overwhelming, and I knew that there were no easy answers, no quick fixes. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The days that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. I tried to act normal, to pretend that everything was fine, but the guilt was eating me alive. Every time I looked at Tom, I felt like a fraud, like I was living a lie. And the worst part was, I couldn't bring myself to end things with Daniel. Despite the guilt, despite the fear, I couldn't let go of the connection we had. But the longer our affair went on, the more complicated things became. The lies, the secrets, they were tearing me apart, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. That moment came one evening, when Tom returned home earlier than expected from a business trip. Daniel and I had just finished dinner, and we were sitting in the living room, talking, when the front door suddenly opened. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as Tom stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. There was an uncomfortable silence, the air thick with tension, as Tom looked from me to Daniel, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with an edge of anger. "Tom, it's not what you think," I began, my voice shaky. But I knew it was too late. The truth was written all over my face, and Tom could see it. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of hurt and betrayal. "How could you do this to me, Sarah? How could you betray me with my own brother?" "I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never meant for this to happen." Tom shook his head, his eyes filled with a pain that cut me to the core. "I trusted you, both of you. And this is how you repay me." Daniel stood up, his expression one of regret. "Tom, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But Tom didn't want to hear it. "Get out," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Both of you. Get out of my house." I wanted to say something, to try and explain, but the words wouldn't come. I stood up on shaky legs, my heart breaking as I realized the full extent of what I had done. I had destroyed my marriage, my family, and there was no way to fix it. As I left the house, I could hear Tom's voice, filled with anger and pain, calling after us. "I never want to see either of you again." The next few weeks were a blur of pain and regret. I moved in with a friend, trying to give Tom the space he needed to process everything that had happened. Daniel and I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The affair that had once brought us so much excitement had now left nothing but destruction in its wake. In the end, I knew that I had only myself to blame. I had let my emotions cloud my judgment, and I had made choices that I would regret for the rest of my life. The spark that I had been searching for had come at too high a price, and I had lost everything that truly mattered to me in the process. As I looked back on those weeks, I realized just how fragile relationships can be, how easily they can be shattered by a moment of weakness. And I knew that I would carry the weight of that knowledge with me for the rest of my life.